In just 24 hours, the beloved child star of Diff'rent Strokes went from a quiet evening at home to a life-and-death emergency. It's a story of a sudden tragedy, frantic moments, and lingering mysteries that still haunt those who loved him. What really happened in those last 24 hours? Let's unravel the true story of Gary Coleman's final day. A day filled with shock, desperate hope, and questions that remain unanswered. An ordinary evening turns tragic. May 26, 2010 seemed like a normal day for 42-year-old Gary Coleman. The former child star was living a low-key life in Utah, far from the Hollywood spotlight. That evening, Gary was at home in Santa Quin, reportedly cooking dinner for his ex-wife, Shannon Price, who was resting in another room. Despite being divorced, Gary and Shannon still shared a home and were trying to maintain a cordial relationship as housemates. For Gary, it was just an ordinary evening with a familiar routine, until everything went horribly wrong. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed through the house. Shannon heard a big loud boom from the kitchen and rushed to see what happened. There, she found a horrifying scene. Gary Coleman was lying on the floor, unconscious and bleeding profusely from a head wound. He had fallen down a small flight of stairs, or possibly hit his head on the kitchen island during the fall. Blood was everywhere, forming a pool around Gary's small frame. In a panic, Shannon grabbed the phone and dialed 911, her heart pounding with fear. On the 911 call, Shannon's voice trembled with desperation. "He just got home. I heard this big bang. There's blood everywhere," she cried frantically. Gary wasn't responding at first. He lay motionless, and Shannon could see him bubbling at the mouth as she described to the dispatcher. "I don't want him to die. I'm freaking out," she pleaded, her words a mix of panic and heartbreak. It was a chaotic, terrifying moment. 1 minute Gary had been making dinner. The next he was fighting for his life on the kitchen floor. Shannon struggled to keep calm as the 911 operator gave instructions. The frantic 911 call, an emergency response. As the emergency operator guided her, Shannon tried to aid Gary, but was clearly in shock. In the recorded 911 call, she can be heard refusing some instructions because she was overwhelmed by the blood. "I'm gagging. I got blood on myself. I can't deal," she admitted in distress. Despite her panic, within minutes, which must have felt like an eternity, help was on the way. Miraculously, Gary began to regain consciousness while Shannon was on the phone. He stirred, even attempting to sit up and stand, despite his severe injury. Shannon, still on with 911, begged him to stay down. "Gary, don't move. Stay there, okay? You have to keep pressure on your head," she urged, trying to prevent him from worsening the bleeding. Gary was groaning, likely disoriented, and in immense pain as he tried to understand what had happened. The situation was extremely dire, a head injury with significant bleeding, but the fact that Gary was conscious gave a glimmer of hope. Before long, paramedics arrived at the Santa Quin house. They found the former sitcom star badly injured but alive. The responders quickly assessed that Gary had suffered a serious head trauma, with an intracranial hemorrhage, bleeding inside the skull, evident from his symptoms. Every second was critical. They carefully stabilized him, controlling the bleeding as best they could, and rushed him out on a gurney to the ambulance. Neighbors and onlookers could only watch in shock as the childhood icon was whisked away, fighting for his life. Gary was first taken to a small local hospital, Mountain View Hospital in nearby Payson, Utah, the closest medical facility to Santa Quin. There, doctors quickly realized the injury was beyond what the small hospital could handle. He had likely sustained an epidural hematoma, a type of brain bleed that can be life-threatening if not treated immediately. To give him the best chance, Gary was transferred as soon as possible to the larger Utah Valley Regional Medical Center in Provo, a better-equipped regional hospital. By the time he arrived in Provo, it was nighttime. Gary Coleman's fate now lay in the hands of experienced trauma surgeons and critical care specialists, fighting for life in the hospital. At the hospital, doctors worked frantically to save Gary's life. He was placed in the intensive care unit, and due to the severity of his head injury, the medical team induced a coma to protect his brain. Tubes and machines now did the work his body couldn't, breathing for him and monitoring his vital signs. It was a frightening scene. Gary Coleman, known for his vibrant personality and that ever-youthful face, now unconscious and surrounded by medical equipment. For Shannon, these hours were agonizing. All she could do was wait and pray as doctors treated Gary's traumatic brain hemorrhage. Incredibly, there was a brief ray of hope the next day. By the morning of May 27th, Gary regained consciousness and was lucid for a short time. He had made it through the night, and as Thursday dawned, he was responsive. Medical staff later confirmed that Gary was awake and even able to communicate during those morning hours. Shannon rushed to his side. In a tender moment amid the beeping machines, Gary managed to speak to her. "I love you, and my head hurts," he whispered, simple words that revealed both his affection and the immense pain he was in. Those would be Gary Coleman's final words, according to Shannon's recollection, and they are haunting in their honesty. Even in suffering, he made sure to tell her he loved her. For a brief moment, it seemed Gary might have a fighting chance. He was awake and knew who was with him, but this glimpse of recovery did not last long. By midday on Thursday, his condition took a sharp turn for the worse. Without warning, Gary's brain hemorrhage caused him to slip back into unconsciousness. He deteriorated rapidly as pressure in his skull increased. Doctors rushed to stabilize him, but the damage to his brain was spreading. Gary was soon placed on full life support, as he could no longer breathe on his own. The earlier hope faded into a grave realization. Gary was now in a coma, and his prognosis was very poor. Shannon stood by, watching in tears as Gary's life hung by a thread. This was the man who had been a household name, who used to light up TV screens with a smile and a witty catchphrase. Now he lay unresponsive, hooked up to machines. The gravity of the situation was sinking in. Doctors informed Shannon that Gary's intracranial hemorrhage was catastrophic. Despite all efforts, his brain had suffered irreparable damage. The likelihood of him regaining consciousness was extremely slim. It was every bit a nightmare scenario, one that just a day ago would have been unimaginable. To understand why Gary's injury was so devastating, it's important to know what he'd been dealing with even before the fall. Gary Coleman had faced a lifetime of health challenges, which left him physically fragile. Chronic kidney disease. He was born with a congenital kidney condition that stunted his growth and required constant medical care. He underwent 2 kidney transplants by age 14, and the medications and illness kept him at a small stature of 4 feet 8. Dialysis and surgeries. For years, Gary needed dialysis treatments, sometimes up to 4 times a day just to survive. He endured multiple surgeries throughout his life, bearing scars both physical and emotional, seizures and other complications. In the years leading up to 2010, Gary suffered recurring health scares. He experienced seizures not long before his death, including at least 2 episodes earlier that year. His body had been through a lot, and doctors knew he was a medically delicate patient. These health issues meant that Gary's body was already fighting an uphill battle. The head trauma and massive brain bleed were crises his body simply might not have the strength to overcome. Still, his medical team did everything possible through Thursday night to keep him stable. Fans and friends, upon hearing the news that Gary was hospitalized, collectively held their breath, hoping for a miracle. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered and the news began to spread that Gary Coleman was in critical condition. A heartbreaking farewell. By the morning of Friday, May 28, 2010, Gary Coleman had been on life support for 2 days. His condition remained extremely critical. Shannon Price was faced with an unbearable decision, one that no loved one ever wants to make. Doctors pulled her aside and gently explained that Gary's chances of recovery were almost zero. In fact, they confided that they did not expect him to make it to the end of that day. Gary's brain had swollen from the hemorrhage, and he had lapsed into a deep coma. Some signs suggested that he had lost basic brain function. Shannon noticed his eyes were fixed and dilated, a very bad sign. It appeared that, for all intents and purposes, Gary was already gone, kept alive only by machines. Imagine being in Shannon's position, the person you care about, who just yesterday was talking and alive, is now lying motionless, with doctors saying there's no hope. After speaking with the medical team, Shannon made the agonizing choice to let Gary go. She gave the doctors permission to remove Gary Coleman from life support that Friday. It was the most difficult decision of her life, as she later said. But she believed it was also the most compassionate. She couldn't bear to see Gary suffer or linger in a vegetative state. This decision was not without controversy, both at the time and especially in hindsight. Gary Coleman had a living will specifying that he wished to be kept alive for at least 15 days, unless he was in an irreversible coma. Instead, only about 48 hours had passed since his fall when the plug was pulled. Shannon claims she had no choice but to act when she did. She later explained that Gary had gone into cardiac arrest at one point on life support, and though he was resuscitated, his heart was failing. In her view, prolonging support was only delaying the inevitable. "The doctors advised me that he wasn't going to make it," she said, recalling that his heart was giving out and would stop regardless. With a heavy heart, Shannon agreed to let him go peacefully rather than prolong his suffering. Around midday on May 28, 2010, doctors turned off the life support machines. Gary Coleman's heart slowed to a stop, and he passed away shortly thereafter. It was 12:05 p.m. local time when Gary was officially pronounced dead, just a little over 2 days since his tragic fall. In the end, the man who had brought laughter to millions with his role as Arnold Jackson on Diff'rent Strokes died quietly in a hospital room, with his ex-wife by his side. Shannon later recounted that the moment the machines were turned off, he was gone immediately, as if his body was ready to rest. Gary was only 42 years old. Shannon Price was in tears, utterly devastated as she walked out of the hospital. It's said that she was so grief-stricken that she even posed for a final photo with Gary moments after he died, a photo that would controversially end up on the cover of a tabloid magazine weeks later, to public outrage. In those initial hours, however, all that mattered was that a bright light had gone out. Gary Coleman, the little man with the big smile and bigger personality, was gone. The news soon spread to the public, and an outpouring of shock and sorrow followed. Aftermath and lingering questions. When word got out that Gary Coleman had died, fans and former co-stars were shocked and heartbroken. The world had lost a familiar face from television's past, a symbol of childhood for many who grew up in the late 70s and 80s. Tributes poured in celebrating Gary's humor, talent, and the joy he brought as a child actor. His Diff'rent Strokes catchphrase, "What you talkin' about, Willis?" echoed in countless memories as people reminisced about his work. Yet amid the mourning, there was also confusion and curiosity. How could such a tragedy happen so suddenly? And was there more to the story of his final day than anyone realized? Soon, questions began to surface about the circumstances of Gary's injury and the decisions made during his final hours. The official investigation concluded that his death was accidental. Police found no evidence of foul play in his fall or at the home. It appeared to be a terrible, tragic accident. However, some of Gary's closest friends and family were not fully satisfied with that explanation. The situation surrounding his fall and the swift removal of life support left them uneasy. Several of Gary's friends voiced doubts and concerns. Anna Gray, a close friend whom Gary had once entrusted with managing his household, revealed a startling fact. Gary's advance healthcare directive explicitly stated he wanted at least 2 weeks of care before any plugs were pulled, should he ever be in a life-threatening condition. In Anna's view, the decision to end life support after just 2 days went against Gary's personal wishes. Another friend, Brandy Buys, outright questioned the story of the fall. She said she didn't believe Gary simply slipped and fell at all. These friends, who knew the couple, suspected there might be more to what happened that night than Shannon had revealed. Part of the skepticism stemmed from Gary and Shannon's turbulent history. Those close to the couple described their relationship as toxic, marred by frequent arguments and volatility. It was known that police had been called to their home multiple times in the past due to domestic disputes. At one point, Gary had even sought a restraining order against Shannon, although he never completed the process. This history of conflict raised an uncomfortable question. Could an altercation have led to Gary's fall? Shannon Price has strongly denied ever hurting Gary or causing his accident, insisting she would never do such a thing to the man she cared about. In the immediate aftermath, Gary's parents, from whom he was estranged, also wondered exactly what happened to their son, though they stopped short of accusing anyone. They, like many, simply wanted answers and closure. Over the years, the mystery around Gary Coleman's final day only grew. Shannon Price found herself under a cloud of suspicion in the public eye, fair or not. In 2025, 15 years after Gary's death, she even volunteered to take a lie detector test on a televised docuseries in an effort to clear up the lingering rumors. The test turned out to be unsettling. When Shannon was directly asked if she had physically caused Gary's deadly fall, her answer was no, but the polygraph results indicated possible deception. The former FBI polygraph examiner on the show stated he was 100% certain that there was more to the story that hadn't been revealed. This revelation reignited debate and speculation. Shannon, however, maintained her innocence, saying, "I would never hurt him," and attributing the fall to Gary's own fragility and health issues. Gary's former colleagues also found the circumstances hard to accept at face value. Todd Bridges, who played Gary's older brother Willis on Diff'rent Strokes, admitted that he still has a lot of questions about how Gary died. Todd revealed that in one of his last conversations with Gary confided that he didn't feel safe. Hearing that after the fact made Todd wonder if Gary had fears in his personal life that were never addressed. There's a lot of questions. Questions about the stairs he fell down, how he died, Todd said, expressing frustration and the feeling that something about the whole story just didn't add up. These sentiments are shared by many fans to this day, who find it tragic and perplexing that a man who survived so much in life could die from a simple household fall. In the official record, Gary Coleman's death remains an accident, a tragic end to a life that had seen incredible highs and painful lows. Yet the haunting uncertainty around his final 24 hours has become part of his story. We may never know every detail of what happened in that kitchen on May 26, 2010. What we do know is that those who loved Gary remember him fondly and continue to seek peace with his passing. His parents, Sue and Willie, expressed their grief and love, saying they loved Gary very much and just wished they could have been there to say goodbye. His friends and co-stars cherish the good memories, the laughter he brought, the brotherhood they shared on set, and the resilient spirit he showed despite his health struggles.